Okay, welcome students who are in junior seminar. This is the start of our next set of lectures. We're doing them online now. So first, some business. Number one, I will be recording new versions of the lectures that we already covered in class. That will include the ground lecture, the synthesis lecture, and also the concept lecture. And then of course I'll put focus first on the lectures that we haven't covered yet in class, starting with this one, the process lecture. This lecture is going to be done in 4 parts, each part about 10 minutes, just because that's the best way for the program that I'm using to upload onto YouTube. And at the end of those 4 parts, there will be a 5th part, which will be an answer and question session in which my wife and my son will stand in for you guys and ask thoughtful questions about the lecture. So, first page. Oh wait, before we actually get on to process a little bit more, I want to talk about some context for those of you who may not remember all that we covered up to this point, or those people who are watching and are not in the junior seminar class. So up to this point, the lectures have been organized around, or like 3 core lectures are organized around concept, process, and product, kind of like the 3 kind of fundamental units about thinking about a work of art. How you think up an idea, how you develop an idea, your process, the way you make a thing, the way you develop your ideas, the way you interact between developing your ideas and making the thing, and then the actual finished object, the product. And how focusing on each of these can lead to a young artist to be more competent as a young artist. So, yeah, the answer to that first question on this page is, of course, process is what all those things have in common. So, the very first part of this lecture is going to be a review of art history, very quickly, leading up to the 20th century, but looking at it only through the lens of how people think about process. But there will be more content as the lecture expands. Like all of my lectures, the primary purpose of this lecture, more than anything else, is to just expose you to as many contemporary artists as possible, but also hopefully with this lecture I will get you guys to think more about why focusing on the process, how you do the thing physically, but also how you do the thing mentally, how the series of actions you make as an artist, making one thing after another thing, how that should be something you should focus on rather than always think about what is the thing I want to make. How being product focused sometimes can be a trap. Okay, so let's talk about process. So those of you who were in the last class, remember we started this lecture and we talked about this very opening point, which was I want you to think about the fact that the divide that we have between process and concept and product that we have today is probably not the way most people, human beings who made art, thought about art. Now, once again, there's a big caveat. I don't want to make too much of a connection between a work of art that is, let's say, a 19th century work of art, an oceanic mask, and Paleolithic cave painting, but I think they are both, and they are different in many ways and examples of vastly different cultures, but in certain ways they reflect a similar idea, which is a culture where thinking about a work of art is not at all separated from the thinking of the act, thinking of the process, and thinking of those processes as performances, things that you do, and not as a means of making a finished object. But most of art history, especially most of the art history that we study, is all about product, because it's from the point of view of authoritarian societies that are top down, and in societies where things are top down, whether that's because the Caesar tells you you got to do it or he'll kill you, or whether it's because you got to do it in order to make enough money to live. The thing about authoritarian top down societies is that there's a lot of emphasis on product. or one of the things about it, like a lot of emphasis on getting the thing to be the way the person who is ordering it or wanting it wants it to be done. And so a lot of the artwork that we admire is very product focused. But keep in mind that you can't make, no matter how much emphasis you put on product, you can't make any work of art without a process, without actually having a means of making it. And then so one of the points I want to make, though, is that being process focused is an idea that has cropped up again and again in different traditions. I think on the previous page I put in a little bit of a hint about like Japanese tea bowls and other kinds of cultural examples where the use of the thing and the way of making the thing is almost considered more important than the thing itself. But it really, I think, in the Western tradition, it's probably with the development of oil painting in the late Renaissance that we start to see a really renewed, not necessarily a conscious interest, but a renewed focus in terms of action on process. And what I mean by that is that painters started to realize that the way you paint, in order to get the product that you want, focusing on the way you paint, focusing on the fundamentals of like mark making and of making decisions about color and making decisions about shape, right? And learning to train yourself to think a certain way is the best way to get the product that you're after. If you focus on trying to make the portrait of the man look like the man, then the painting won't look like the man. But if you make the painting about focusing on the light, the changes of value, the shapes that you see, learning to see in a process-focused way of just making marks and reacting to marks, you wind up making a better painting of the sitter, to give an example of the Titian. And this idea, really kind of starting especially with Titian, runs through the whole tradition of Western painting. But there's this back and forth from the Renaissance into the Baroque. There's this back and forth dialogue between artists who are very pro-drawing and pro-planning, and therefore also pro-product, and see the artists who are much more painterly as being, I don't know, slovenly or just not as well organized, and the vice versa, the painters who are more painterly, seeing the artists who are more line-based as being too tight and therefore unrealistic, like not actually achieving a product that has movement, has energy, has life. So a traditional dichotomy would be, when talking about the Baroque, would be to focus on Carracci and Caravaggio. But I'm going to choose instead Carracci compared to a much later Baroque artist, Tiepolo, because I think the contrast between them gives you a good understanding of this difference between one painter who is very product focused, Carracci, who is very line and drawing focused. Everything has to be planned out and drawn out and has to be very carefully thought out in terms of as a line drawing, versus an artist who is very painterly and who makes up his ideas in the act of painting and in the act of deciding shapes and marks, and allows then the atmosphere to be created in the process. Now, Tiepolo's finished works, his ceiling paintings, are very product focused. They're beautiful products and they're quite tight, but the fundamental beginning point are these oil sketches, which are quite loose, and that's the point I want to make. And here are some more. I put some extra examples of some of these oil sketches. If you ever go to the Art Institute of Chicago, they have a number of these oil sketches by Tiepolo, and they are gorgeous. They are some of my favorite paintings. And these are paintings that were not made for any person. They were not made to be products. They were made purely just as an active process of figuring out his ideas, and they're done loosely and gesturally, and that's the point, because by doing them loosely and gesturally, it allows him to find the right balance that he's looking for. Here's another example. Another part of art history where we see this divide between process and product would be in the great Ingres versus Delacroix debate. Now, if you study this in art history, you would learn you would learn it as being a debate between Romanticism versus Neoclassicism, or you might learn it as a debate between the way the contemporaries thought of it, a debate